Excellent. Well, let's get started to make the most of the time we've got together. And as people join, they can join in on the discussion. Just as a quick note, we are recording this session, but we're only recording the speakers. If at the end of the session you decide to ask a question by voice, you will be included in the recording, but just let me know if you want yourself removed from the recording when we publish it. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Timothy Kariotis. I'm the Melbourne School of Government's lecturer in digital government, and I'm very excited about our discussion today on design and digital government because a lot of my work and my PhD is in the space of design, so it's a discussion I'm really interested in.
As much as we can put in our bin.
Just as a reminder for those of you on the call to mute yourself if you haven't already. Wonderful. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm calling in from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. Let me pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that all of us are calling in from land across the country, which is stolen land, where resistance against colonisation is ongoing. Let me pay my respects to any elders on the call today and acknowledge that many of the topics we're talking about in terms of how we organise, build empathy for one another, build community around very important topics that First Nations people have contributed a lot to these discussions and a lot to our university community. Today, I'm joined by four really amazing speakers from very diverse interdisciplinary backgrounds to talk about the role of design in digital government. Before I introduce these speakers, I just want to acknowledge that when I was putting together this panel, I wanted to bring in as many diverse perspectives as possible. It's hard to do when you only have four people on a panel, but I think we've got some really interesting viewpoints, experiences, and just value sets in terms of how to apply design. And I know there's lots of people on the call who also work in this space, and I'm really keen to hear your perspectives when we get to the questions at the end of the seminar. So let me introduce our speakers. The first speaker I want to introduce is Professor Katja Holter-Otto, who is a Professor of Engineering Design at the Melbourne School of Engineering. She works in the area of design theory and methodology with specific emphasis on interdisciplinary topics linked to engineering design. Her expertise includes creativity in engineering, empathy and user-centered design, design thinking and design methods. She is also active in complex system design, including the design of product families, and is interested in the circular economy for product development. Thank you for joining us today, Katja. If you can give a little wave so everyone knows who you are, wonderful. Our second speaker is Associate Professor Jenny Waycott. Jenny is an Associate Professor in the School of Computing and Information Systems. Her work broadly aims to understand how new technologies can be designed and used to foster social well-being in later life. Jenny leads a program of research that is examining how emerging technologies such as virtual reality and social robots are used by caregivers and older adults to provide social and emotional enrichment in later life. Her research aims to improve how we design and deploy technology with older adults with a respectful and empathetic focus. Thank you for joining us today, Jenny. And I should just say, one of the things I've worked with Jenny before, one of the things I'm really interested in is Jenny's focus on context and the complex context in which we're implementing these new technologies. And I think that links back to some of Katja's work on complex system design. Our third speaker is Andrew Apostola. Andrew is the CEO and co-founder of Portable. Portable is a purpose-led tech and design company founded here in Melbourne. Portable uses design and technology to help organisations transform the way in which they deliver services, particularly in the area of justice, healthcare, education and government. Andrew's main area of focus is in justice, government, education and retail, and he's had a long career working in these different contexts and areas of design. Thank you for joining us, Andrew.
Thanks, Tim.
Our final speaker is Luke Thomas. Luke is also from Portable. He's a senior legal designer at Portable, and he works to create interactions with the legal system that makes things better for the people using the system. And I think that's a great thing. That's what we all want. And I'm from the Melbourne Law School, so I can really align with that value set. Luke seeks to achieve this through designing products and introducing design solutions that increase equality and access to justice. One example of his work has been designing dispute resolution products for National Legal Aid and WorkSafe Victoria. I'm currently working with Luke on a project, so I can vouch for how amazing his design perspective is. So thank you for joining us today, Luke. So I guess the first question I want to ask, and it's a very simple question, but I feel like it could take us in many different directions, is what do we mean when we say design? It's a term that gets thrown around a lot in different spaces and contexts, but what does it actually mean to be a designer, to do design work? Katja, maybe I can throw to you with this first question. I know this is something you're teaching at the School of Engineering as well.
Sure, and then you recognize the rabbit hole really well, so I decided to keep this really simple. So to me, design is essentially creative problem solving, but that includes defining that you're solving the right problem, not just a symptom of the real problem, for example. I can go on for an hour, but I'll stop there.
Such a succinct and wonderful answer. Andrew, I know that you've been working in design across a lot of different contexts. So how do you define design?
I think it's a pretty good shot, Katja, I reckon, of a way of describing it. I think there's a lot of misnomers around the term, and it does very much come down to the idea of being able to problem solve and being able to bring in disparate areas of knowledge and practice to then solve problems. We look at it from a human-centered design lens, the way we talk about it at Portable. So we centralize the problem being on the individuals are facing. And then there's obviously system designs too. But I think for me, I would say it's like, how do you solve human problems really with the tools that you have or the discipline knowledge that you might have in a subject matter area. A lot of people don't think they're designers when they actually are.
And I guess on that topic of people not, realizing they're designers, there is I guess, increasing push towards involving the end user as kind of co-designers or co-researchers. And I was wondering, for you, Jenny, you're working in the space of aged care settings where you're having to work with people in vulnerable situations and very complex situations. How have you found the process of even just explaining and bringing them into the design process?
That's a good question. Look, one of the things I was going to say about what is design is that for me, it continues in use. And I do see that happening in aged care in terms of how the staff in aged care use technology to support the people they're caring for. They are designers. They wouldn't call themselves designers, but I definitely see components of them designing the technology-based experiences in collaboration with the people that they're working with. And it's a very individual one-to-one approach. So I think it's really important in those sorts of settings where you've got people who have complex needs to adopt a one-to-one approach. It's very difficult to design something that's going to work for everybody, and so bringing people in individually and working with people in that personal way is really important.
Thank you, Jenny. And I really like that you've kind of brought up that role of empathy, because we're going to come back to that later. And Luke, I guess for you, I was thinking about this when we were speaking before the call, that you started doing a law degree and then you've come into the space of design. So you're kind of bridging these two spaces. How do you describe design when you're working to people who come from a more legal background, who I think, and I assume, have a very different way of viewing problems and problem solving?
Well, I think the biggest thing, and the thing that attracted me to moving from law to working at a place like Portable Design Agency in the first place, is being able to think of our essential institutions like the legal system in terms as a service and not just an institution. So for me, design is freeing up different ways of thinking and different mindsets that you can apply to legal problems that don't rely always on how things have been. Examining the reasons for ways that things are being done for a reason, but also using the part of the creative brain that lawyers don't really get to use very often. When if you rely too heavily on precedents, you don't realize how to creatively apply something that's been done in the past to come up with a new way of interpreting the law, for as an example of how I would think of design. Or even things that people are doing now on just intentionally trying to draft contracts that are more easily understandable by a wider range of people is a design practice that lawyers are doing all the time. So I think it's just pointing out all these moves towards accessibility and inclusivity that people really want to do is really at the heart of what legal design is championing. So that's a big part of it for me.
Thanks, Luke. And I'm really happy that you kind of brought what inspired you to get into this space of design, because I know there's lots of people on the call who have probably heard these terms. Maybe they've been involved in a design thinking workshop and they're probably thinking, how do I bring this into my practice? And I guess I wanted to open this to the whole panel, but Luke, I might stay with you, but what what inspired you to get into the space of design, and what were kind of the initial first baby steps that you took to start to build yourself up as someone who practices in this space?
Yeah, so for me, it was that dissatisfaction with a lot of legal theory, not so much at the Melbourne Law School, of course, because it's such a great institution, but being focused on how things were. So tradition, understanding the problem space and operating within certain limits. But the exact antithesis of that was also being very critical. In my mind, my brothers are both technologists, and they'll buy any gadget. One brother is designing video games for Oculus even before Facebook had made Meta a thing. So he just loves innovation or invention-led practices, which I always thought forgot about people and the problem, and you end up with something that no one wants at the time, like Google Glass at the time. So for me, looking at human-centered design was trying to balance what's interesting and exciting and out there in the world with what people actually need and want to use. And then that third layer of these are real problems that really affect people and things that I'm passionate about, which is why most people get into the legal field anyways. They're very passionate about solving legal problems for people. So having those three areas of, I guess, technology, empathy, and kind of legal problem solving was really what got me into legal design.
It's really interesting that you kind of raise this passion for solving problems, because I hear that whenever I speak to someone working in this space. And I guess I wanted to pass this to Katja, because you're teaching students how to work and think and practice in this space. What's the first step of kind of, I guess, inducting someone into the space of design and preparing them to think in what is a very different way of thinking for many people?
So to me, it's actually integral to engineering. So I'm glad I get to go after Luke, because problem solving and engineering is engineering, and engineering is solving, humans solve things for other humans. So it's very human centered in every way. Maybe people have traditionally not been talented in it, but it's part of it. Any engineering program has something like it's safe or it's easy to use or something. They just kind of get dismissed as these sort of soft or hard to measure requirements. But to me, it's just part of engineering. So when we go from engineering design, we talk about the process. It starts from what is the problem, what are the requirements. And I don't make a particular difference that this is now a user-centered, this is a technical. We just look at it from all these different viewpoints, whether it's an environmental, sort of planet-centric, human, everything comes into requirements, and these are the requirements, and that defines the quality of the product. So my goal is really to integrate it as nothing special, but part of it, everything.
And I guess it's really interesting that you raised this idea that design doesn't have to be focused towards something that is technical or something like some specific element. But I guess I wanted to throw to Jenny and Andrew, because both of your work has been, I guess, applying design to things which are digital. If that's emerging technologies in the aged care space, or I know, Andrew, you've written a lot about kind of the digital transformation of government. What benefit or what value does a design perspective bring specifically to thinking about technology? And Jenny, I might throw to you first, if that's okay.
Sure, thank you. Well, I'll probably just echo what's already been said, and I think that the key value is understanding the people that you're designing for and their needs. So you are designing in response to a human need and a human problem. The area that I work in, where, for the last 10 years or so, I've been looking at the design and use of social technologies to support older adults who are socially isolated or who are living in aged care. And I think in that area, it's really, really crucial to understand what the individual needs are that you're designing for, to understand how technology can best be used to make a difference and to provide benefit in that setting, and also to really adopt a critical perspective and look at what technology can't do, what technology might do not so well, and where there might be situations where technology can actually cause harm rather than cause the intended, create the intended benefit that we're trying to get as designers. So I think, expanding on that, it's also important to always be sort of, reflective about what you're designing and why, and who it's benefiting and how it's benefiting them.
Thanks, Jenny. And I love that thing of what technology can't do, because I think in my own work in healthcare, that's probably the biggest question. What shouldn't be technology driven? Andrew, I might pass to you, because you've kind of been really thinking about this in the context of government. Where would you take this discussion?
Yeah, I'll take the other lens from Jenny, and it'll sound similar. So Firstly, like we believe in government as an institution, as a power for change. So I want to put that out there, and very, very strong believers. And it's often folks will get out there and start bashing the role of government. And really, you can talk about some of the nuances between the way in which big bureaucracies work. And that's what you're really talking about between like a large organization and a government organization. There's independencies. But boy, you know, I think when you get into the thick of government systems and the way in which organizations start to think about themselves, you very, very quickly see that, you know, systems, processes push all of the actual end users out to the side. And the expectations, like we have very, very poor expectations as citizens as what government could do for us. Like we wish it would do more, but ultimately we're surprised when we see a government service that is well designed, that does have a human touch, that starts in one department and ends in another, but is a single user experience. So all those things are kind of, you know, I guess my first point is we're starting at a low base, right? When we come to thinking about that. And so what design in government and what we're finding, you know, within government a lot about is about that, you know, our reorientation of a system or service towards the people that are using it. And that plays out in the lens of, simply like procurements or like how we think about designing a system. Often when people are coming to the point of, well, we need to decide something, the people that they're asking are the people internal to the business. Like we experience that a lot within courts. You know, courts are the most horrendous places for technology and user experience you can possibly imagine, and they do a woeful job internationally around that, mainly because of the way they function and the way in which they're set up. And a lot of it has to do with the way in which they procure and make decisions around, well, okay, I'm going to design a service. Who am I going to ask? Who's going to use it? Well, I'm going to ask the immediate people around us. I'll ask like the administrators, the clerks, I'll ask the judge what he thinks usually, or she, but usually it's a dude. And therefore we get a lot of systems that get that designed out from that way. So all this stuff is kind of inherent, and the trend in government at the moment now is we're seeing a lot of capability uplift within this to kind of better understand, I think, like, I'd say less from a technology lens, more of a design lens, the way in which the translation, the interface. There's lots and lots of great work that's being done on making it much more accessible and reflecting your needs. Technology, still a long way to go. So from a design perspective.
It's really interesting that you say that, Andrew, because what I think you've done is you've taken this away from designing technology to designing systems. And I think all of the speakers, all of you have kind of touched on this. I wonder how you balance that relationship, though, where you want well-designed technology, but you also need to unpick these complex systems to kind of fit that technology or use that technology to make these systems more cohesive. You've worked extensively alongside or with government departments. What are your kind of top hot tips for even approaching the discussion of managing bureaucracy and changing practice, not just falling into the trap of saying, let's put a new technology in and it's going to solve all of our problems?
Again, Tim, it's going to sound like I'm just banging on. It's the same kind of, information that we've spoken about. But it really is, like, from our experience, it is literally putting humans in the room in the design process. And you mentioned co-design earlier on, and that's one of the visible factors that we use to kind of redesign that, because ultimately nothing's going to stop you if you've got like the chief magistrate banging on about the piece of crap that they want to install in the magistrate's court. You won't stop them. Like, there's no real, what you can do though is try and get as much the voice of as many users who are actually using the experience in that to then help influence the design recommendations, construct and articulate the journeys of people that may not have been represented or thought about by that system. And that's how you do it. People are still trying to do it and still getting it absolutely wrong. So, and I'm missing all the factors here of like agile development processes, QA. There's a whole stack of things that might, like organizational change and capability uplift. and don't get me started with digital transformation. So it's all those factors are kind of are real roadblocks, I think, and it's really, I think it's really hard as well. It's exceptionally hard. Anyone paints it as being easy to kind of design something that works really well is, they're hiding stuff under the carpet.
What I kind of took away from that is that this is really complex, but something you mentioned earlier is there's a need for upskilling or preparing people for this work or bringing in a mindset of what this work actually means. And Katja, I wanted to bring you in here because you're obviously teaching students on a day-to-day basis. What kind of principles do you bring to preparing people for this work that the public sector might be able to adopt to kind of prepare for this very complex change of thinking that Andrew is outlining?
Good question. Let's see. I'll try to be quick about it. Some of the things include stakeholder analysis. So when we talk about user needs, it's not just your end user. Absolutely important, that has to be there. But everybody else who's impacted by whatever, either the technology or service, whatever you're designing, or who impacts it. So who makes a decision to buy, who puts the money, who's impacted by it, whatever benefits or whatever it does. So involving and understanding their pain points. And obviously you can't design for all of them, but at least what the decisions you make as you go. So kind of understanding all stakeholders. Frequent testing. Andrew mentioned the agile, but in any method that you use, try very quickly trying something out. We talk about universal design. I think that's particularly relevant for government. Like Jenny mentioned, that you need to just somehow make a service that's literally for everybody. When you're in a business, you kind of, for those who buy your product, but government is literally for everybody. We have tools for that. We can kind of discuss. It's not going to be ever perfect, but it's better than without those tools, right? So I think those are some of the ones that we talk about.
And I guess I wanted to build on this and maybe pass over to Luke. When you're working with clients in government and you're bringing in these methods and approaches, what's been your experience of actually putting this into practice? And I guess having worked with you now, I guess there's an element of training and preparing people to enter this space. How do you go about that?
Yeah, that's one of the most important parts. We've been lucky to work with really like-minded partners just because of who becomes attracted to our work and wants to pilot and get things off the ground. But even with organizations where we have an internal, I guess people use the word championing a lot, there's always going to be a conversation with lawyers or project managers or people who just really aren't on board. And those conversations is also just about applying empathy in both sides of a project. So co-design, talking to people, getting all the ideas about what they want, quick, push a button, everything's fixed. But then another separate workshop, okay, here are all the risks, the requirements, here's just your chance for your voice to be heard. And I think a lot of people are distrustful of things they're not involved in. So the more involvement you can get from stakeholders, the more you can show that, okay, you've contributed to this project, you've shared your voice here, we've heard your concerns and fed it into the designs in this way. So that kind of listening, being empathetic, taking their feedback on board and letting it change. And it also is also very useful because it's not so much about my job being helping to bring lawyers up to speed and then lowering designers' expectations so what can really happen, even though that kind of feels like it sometimes. It's also about translating. So I'll help to upskill people with more of a legal thinking and a risk aversion into design, but also help to teach my team about the complexity of the subject matter they're dealing with and how change isn't always possible in the way they want it to be because of some sort of legal or bureaucratic restraint. So we have to actually think creatively and all come together to find a solution.
Something which I just found really fascinating here is even just preparing the design team, because that is, even in my own work, entering new contexts, there is such a learning curve for us as researchers and designers. And I wanted to open this to you, Jenny, because you're working in a very complex aged care setting, and I know you've got students who are coming into this space with you. How do you prepare them to, I guess, be empathetic to what is a very complex and a very vulnerable context?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a really interesting challenge, and it's a challenge not just in the aged care space, but thinking more broadly about the other students that I teach who have come through a technology program, you know, so they're training to be computer scientists and technologists, and they often have a solution in mind. So part of the challenge is encouraging people to remove all their preconceptions about what they think a solution would be to the issues that they're aiming to design for, and really to get a really deep understanding of that problem space and that design space, and to work from there. So to work from the bottom up rather than coming in with an idea and saying, okay, we're going to test out this idea. I mean, you do have to do the testing of your ideas, but it's really important to be open-minded about what those ideas might be, you know, what kinds of things might work in that space. And so, yeah, I do try to encourage my students to keep an open mind about what sort of challenges they're going to face. A lot of people do have preconceptions about what aged care looks like, what problems need to be solved. And often, you know, it's a different problem that needs to actually be tackled.
That's so true. And I know even in the work I'm doing now with Luke, you know, we started the project with an idea of what might be the problem and solution, and it has changed completely in the 6 weeks we've been working together. I wanted to continue this conversation of universal design because one of the questions in the chat from Blake, I'll read it out. He says that the concept of universal design, or design for everyone, can run the risk of being designed for no one, as well as cost and other delivery risks. How do you teach or coach new designers to consider these risks, in particular in the context of government? So I don't know, Katja, could I maybe throw to you, because I know this question was addressed at you. What are your thoughts on this challenging risk in this space?
So let me acknowledge that nothing will ever be 100% universal. So there are obviously limits to it, but we've noticed few things that as long as you keep the goal in mind, that you just want to make a good service and not like, because people sometimes translate universal as in assistive, which then for some reason is like poorly working, ugly and painful and expensive. But if you just keep in mind the good service and then just make it universal. So things that are universal that work really well are like sliding doors. When you enter airport we haven't gone recently to unless you started flying. But if you remember airports, you go there with luggage. There's ramps to the doors automatically open. It's kind of noisy, but whatever TV you watch, it has closed captioning on it, and it's pretty marvelous. None of that is designed for you, but it works for us, right? So there are needs of those who need special needs that we also benefit from, and that's super useful. So like a really simple thing, the alt text and descriptions in some of the things, when you're in a loud environment or you don't want to listen to an embarrassing video like as you're commuting to work, it's pretty handy when it has the text in it. But again, it's not for you, it's for somebody else. So essentially kind of trying to identify the benefits of that sort of alternate solution to others, and then just keeping that in mind and making good service for everyone with it. So then we can do that through interesting things. I had she's now graduated, but maybe I should let others speak, but there's interesting things. So one of the key things, if I ask somebody to do assistive or universal, they tend to go with that sort of an ugly special version for somebody special, but not me. But then if you describe the situation in a more common way, so let's take hearing, for example. So instead of, let's design this for those who can't hear, you say, let's design this for a situation where it's so loud or for some other reason you can't hear. And like Bing, the way people think, it's completely different. And the solutions that come out work for also those, not 100% of the time, but way more often than otherwise. So those are some of the common things that we recommend. Then there's also traditional guidelines that you can just look up. Universal design for all, or however you want to call it. But there's really good design guidelines how to do that.
So what I'm hearing from this is that there's an opportunity here that if we design for people who might face the most significant challenges, those things are going to flow through the community, and there's going to be benefits for those people. And one of the projects I'm thinking of, I had a student who was looking at how we design government websites for culturally and linguistically diverse communities who also live with disabilities, and how designing for that group would also have huge ramifications for other communities that would intersect with that group. I guess I wanted to pass to you, Andrew, because you're working in government, this issue of universal design, and I know you've responded to one of the questions in the chat, but how do we conceptualize really unique needs or unique barriers that sometimes do get missed out because those people may haven't been included in the user testing, in the personas? How do we consider that and not fall into that risk?
Oh, it's a it's a tough one, right? And it comes down to the sort of Luke will, empathize with this sort of shared experiences. Like when we were designing, we got a platform that helps couples divorce, Amica. And that's a really large project. And I'm going through the very, very early design stages and looking at a specific group of people, which would be people who've experienced family violence, and going, okay, you know what, our service is going to do too hard. We're just going to push that. It's going to be a referral pathway for all these people elsewhere. Other services can take that, can take on that user group because it will be too difficult for us. And you see that kind of decision making happening time and time again. And especially when the constraints of time and money and effort, and everyone's trying to creating something new, a new service. I think it's very challenging. But I think it's an individual choice too, and I think it's up to designers and people in those teams to actually say, you know what, we do need to do like one sprint to at least consider that, or do some research to connect that pathway, or that similar pathway with another user experience or user story that is happening. Because you'll often find also that there's intersectionality, like really common missing middle factors for people that are using systems and services as well. So, it's really tough. I often think it's just it comes down to the culture of the team and the two people putting together, and the sacrifices that they're willing to make personally on the project and to the stakeholders, to say this is really important and we need to get it done. The other spectrum is you dispatch it out. You just create this thing. Here it is. Forget it. And then you iterate in V4, V5, and V6. Listen, and sometimes that might be the way that it needs to happen, but often, like to that the call question, people will say they want accessibility and language translation and all these things happening in a digital service. But ultimately the money isn't there in the budget, and we get something that's tokenistic, and you might support one language when you should be supporting 7. That's really, I think it comes down to experience of people had to have been burned, and look at a user group and go, hang on a second, we never got to that group. They're never getting serviced by this product that we've built because no one's made the case. And I think as a designer, you carry that experience, and you bring it to you, and then you see remarkable kind of people finding the time to at least keep those features or factors alive. And I haven't answered it as eloquently as I'd like to, because I think it's freaking hard unless you've got a ton load of cash, and or you've got a government department that's saying we want to solve this specific thing about our platform. Getting it there from the start's really hard.
Thanks, Andrew. And something I just took away from that, and I'm reflecting on my own work in healthcare as well, is that multi-channel approach. You might have one digital channel, but then you've got these other channels that complement and that work together so that as many people get a great experience. And that might not always be digital. It might be a face-to-face appointment.
Yeah, it's exactly right. We run Yarra Trans, for the Tran network in Victoria, and there's they still continue to have like a phone service. So if you want to find the time, if you want to find out when the tram is going to be on, like you literally just call this number. Could we replace that with something that is a little bit more accessible? Yes, but it's serving one particular group of the community quite well as a piece of standalone technology at the moment. So yeah, once things are up and running as a channel, it also has its own issues about whether you decommission or whether you improve it.
Yeah, that's a really great example. Luke, I wanted to pass to you, because I guess what's unique about government is that in most cases, people don't have a choice. You can't not engage with MyGov, you can't not pay your taxes. So as we see this change of government and the risks posed by maybe excluding certain groups, if we have a single channel digital approach which isn't accessible, how have you kind of thought about that as someone who's come from a law background and gone into this design space, about how we ensure that what is not a choice is still accessible to these people?
Yeah, so I think that's where, and I think a lot of especially people on my team that work with lawyers and don't understand the constant need for risk aversion, actually can be very helpful, because it's actually not so much risk aversion as critical thinking, considering nuance and multiple scenarios. And what that does for me is, in these kind of prioritization activities, like the one Andrew mentioned, I'm really very well familiar with that, that idea of having to, the painful prioritization of not being able to solve the problem of people who are going through maybe a family violence situation, who want to separate from their partner, and having to refer them, not so much exclude them from the process. That's a decision that has to be made. But in terms of what we still have to do as our responsibility and kind of duty of care as designers, is to ensure that we know enough about the problem that even if we can't solve it, we're not going to make it worse. So that's, in this context, it required understanding power dynamics. So even though we've mentioned several times in the onboarding experience that Amica is not right for your situation, if you think you're experiencing family violence, go here instead. As the process goes on, there's still mechanism within the way that people negotiate to ensure that if one party is still continuing on and exhibiting patterns of financial abuse or domestic violence, that there's still those kind of call outs and interactions kind of thought of within the tool. So not just assuming, okay, we've referred them out, our duty of care is gone. So that kind of ability to consider multiple situations and areas of risk as you're going through a tool. I think the same applies to accessible design. While it's not always possible to cater to all ways of interacting with the websites, you can also imagine, okay, in what ways are we really making the language as inaccessible as possible? Let's reverse that. So even though we can't translate, we can write in plain English, and that's a lot easier for Google Translate to handle than difficultly phrased sentences and things like that. So it's always considering that kind of duty of care and making sure that even if you don't solve the problem, you're not exacerbating it with the thing that you're designing.
Thanks, Luke. That's a really great example of even thinking about how, I guess, the low-hanging fruit, that kind of plain language, it kind of opens up other opportunities that might not be your role that other people could consider. I've had a few questions directed to me in the chat, which I'm trying to summarize into one pithy question that I can ask you all. And I think the way I'm going to phrase it is around partnerships, because when we're designing, if it's portable, collaborating with government, I know, Katja, you've done a lot of work with private industry, and Jenny, you've been working in the aged care sector. It does require partnerships where we work together, we build trust with another organization. And I wanted to get a sense of how have you approached building partnerships and having this initial discussion, and what's been the roadblocks and the enablers, and how might other people navigate that? Katja, maybe I could pass to you first, because I know you've worked with a lot of different companies in this design space.
I got to say, though, I think the private companies are probably an easier case in this, because you have certain paying customers and it sort of goes that way. So I would argue that government is more complex. So I would actually rather like to hear from others. If not, then I'll continue, but I think we get more out of the others.
Okay, I might open up to Andrew then, because I know that you've kind of had to navigate this space of building these amazing partnerships.
Yeah, well, God, yeah, it's a really partnerships with, so it's really hard, because what is a partnership, right? Like, are you in a partnership if you're a contractor delivering something for someone else? Is that really a partnership? Often it's not. And so it comes down to like the power dynamics. We often put ourselves in a scenario where we come in like partnership means that we have a stake at the table. So we'll try and own a piece of if it's an innovative piece of technology. So not because we're trying to capitalize the process, but just so that there's a true negotiation conversation about what good and what an outcome might look like. And we've got a whole range of partnerships with a whole bunch of other people, that the community partnerships, we've got a language translation partnership. We've got partnerships with Indigenous engagements, and they're all like critical, crucial kind of things that we bring in at any one time based on the shape of the relationship. I could talk for a long time. Is there anything specific you want me to reflect?
I guess what you've kind of raised this already, that government in itself is complex. There's many different gatekeepers, and there's also, I guess, a level of conservatism, that change is hard, and that people can get into a culture where bringing in new ideas is seen as risky. In those initial discussions, if it's as a contractor or as an actual partner, how do you navigate that? And I guess I'm thinking the way I think of it is a clash of cultures, because I know Portable is quite dynamic and innovative. Does that
helps a bit? Yeah, okay. Like I wouldn't say we've got like a full documented process for how that, but I think there's sort of tips, and it depends if if you're, I can talk to if you're on the government side, what you should be doing might be a bit more useful. And I think that I think like a good partnership means that you're looking for obviously a skill match. So you've got to have a skill set that kind of matches up, and you've got to have signals that there is like a broad coalition of people within an organization that want that believe in the change. And that sounds like ephemeral, but it's really, really important that those signals are there rather than speaking just to the one individual that really wants to make the thing happen. And because once you start getting other like more broader people within an organization on board with the problem space, and you give yourself that time for parties to get into that problem space, that's when you can see the partnership in its the potential partnership in its action and forming. And that can happen with government. And in fact, the best relationships we have are people that are within, I'm talking like large state government and federal bureaucracies right at the top of agencies that are always going that extra length, bending the rules a little bit in terms of what how they're talking to us. Like the procurement wants people to go down a single path. The single, and even if you get through that, you get to the legal stage too. And the legal stage wants to obliterate any form of partnership, just a contractual obligation. So it's often those individuals that really want to make the change on both sides that make it really, really malleable and force these friction points where the partnership can start out and then evolve over time. We got some fabulous partners. Like and they've been. And we've all had to leave something like on the we've had to sort of put something aside to get there on the way. So I'm not ready to write the playbook for that, obviously, but yeah, I think it's fascinating. That's where the real interesting stuff happens. But you've really got, I think both parties really have to let go. They really have to sort of give up a lot and put in a lot and say, all right, this is a longer term thing. Often we're the partner that's surviving the project. Like, we'll have people that will come in and make all the decisions early on, and we're still there 5 years later and it's a completely different team. And so, being engaged, having a provider engaged at that stage is really important. So I don't know, I'm trying to not come across as like that people pay us money to do services, right? So there's always like this kind of like sense of like, well, maybe they're just trying to like, find a way in, or we don't work like that. And we try and, create the right environment to get there. But, I would say maybe, 2 out of 10 organizations are able to have that type of real, true partnership conversation.
Thanks, Andrew. And if you ever do write the playbook, I'm sure many people are going to want to read it. But I think what I took away from that is the need for champions, champions in both organizations, and champions, I think, that can speak a common language or find common values. And I guess I wanted to pass to Jenny on this question, because I guess going into aged care, and you've kind of mentioned this, that there are complexities and values and the need for empathy. How have you gone about breaching a discussion of entering an aged care space, quite vulnerable, bringing in these new technologies?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Look, my perspective is a little bit different because I'm a researcher. So I'm also going in there in these spaces as a researcher, and to do research. And there's a lot of generosity involved, I think, in people partnering with researchers, and especially, we have to make sure that the partnership is beneficial to all parties. And so I think that's a really important part of it, that we make sure we're contributing in some meaningful way to the participants we're working with, to the staff we're working with, so the aged care staff we're working with. And it does, I very much agree with Andrew's comments on the need for champions. So that's also the case when you're establishing a research partnership. You really do need champions in the organisation to smooth the way and to understand what you're trying to achieve from that partnership, and to see the benefit that is going to come about for all parties.
Thanks, Jenny. I really like this idea of giving back from a research perspective, which is quite, I guess, a unique thing that we're conscious of in our research ethics as well. I'm about to open up to the audience for Q&A. So please, if you're in the audience, start thinking of your questions, type them in the chat box or raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. While you're doing that, though, I kind of want to do a very rapid round to our speakers and ask them one final question from me. We talk about design principles, and most designers will have design principles as generic design principles. But what are your kind of top 3 design principles that you bring to every project that you are essential to your work and your values? Luke, I'm going to put you on the spot and throw to you first, if you don't mind.
Not at all. I think for me, the first one's obviously, but accessibility, and that's not just in the technical sense, because when you get into interface design, especially, accessibility kind of refers to the set of principles you're holding to ensure that different modes of communication are able to be accessed by everyone. But for me, it's even just around different ways of thinking or looking at the world. So for something to be designed well, it has to become ubiquitous for everyone. And I think some of the examples that Katya mentioned earlier with closed caption, for example, wasn't designed for me, but now I use it on my TV all the time, just in case my partner's sleeping and I want to stay up and watch my shows. So accessibility and ubiquity are really important. There's a principle, I haven't actually articulated these in succinct ways, but a principle around prioritization and quick wins. So being able to focus in on something that you can get done early that meets needs for people where they are, instead of waiting for reform further on down the line. And I think the last one is just around equality and just treating people's voices equally, which is a hugely important part of workshop facilitation and just how much weight we give different people's opinions and their viewpoints. So, yeah.
Thanks, Luke. That's great. I'm about to pass to Katya next.
Sure. I think mine, one is more of a principle. So test often and not fail early, but learn early, and don't just assume and make something perfect, but test early. And then the other one is just why. Always ask why. Whatever you do, just ask why. That'll help you a lot in every situation.
Thanks, Katya. Andrew?
I think similar to Luke, but human-centered obviously is the #1 kind of principle that we always look for when we're thinking about solutions first, and whoever that human is. And I think there's a real. I'll add some more to add some breadth to it. Like, we really think a lot about instead of like designing new systems, but wrapping around old crappy ones, especially in government. It's really, really hard to make change, and a lot of people want to come in. And we often say that people are just ripping out one big shitty old system to replace it with another big shitty new system that will be old very, very soon. So as a principle, it's not going there first. It's looking at how we can improve the interface layer over the top of the conversational layer to improve the experience first, and then build the adaptive systems underneath that might enable it. There's enough modern APIs and modern technologies, even with the cruddy systems that we have, that can facilitate that type of design that we expect of government and services.
Thanks, Andrew. And Jenny, finally?
So I think I'll just emphasize empathy, which we've already talked about a lot today. And so that importance of really understanding the people you're designing with and for, and understanding, the situation that they're facing and from their perspective. And linked to that is that idea of being open-minded about what the problem is, making sure that you not only so we talk about getting the design right and getting the right design. So not only making sure that you're getting the design right through that rapid testing and prototyping, but also that you're getting the right design by really understanding the problem that you're designing for.
Thanks, Jenny. I think we've got some really great principles to take away from this seminar. We're at the hour, so I'm going to have to end what is a wonderful conversation there. But I want to say a big thank you to Jenny, Luke, Andrew, and Katya for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, and I hope everyone who joined enjoyed the conversation. Just a quick little plug for our next seminar. So I'll share my screen so you can see. So on the 1st of December, we are joined by Professor Beth Simone Novick from GovLab in New York, who has written a diverse of books on the topic of public innovation, engagement of the public in digital government transformation. And Beth and Holly, one of our honorary fellows, will be sitting down to talk about this key issue of how do we involve the public in what is this complex, changing space of government. Professor Beth Simone Novick has spent time in Australia, so is very well understanding how our system works and the complexities that some of our speakers have spoken about today. So please join us for that seminar, 10 a.m. on the 1st of December. There'll also be an opportunity for networking online after the seminar, so hopefully we can see you there. But otherwise, one more big thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for taking the time to join us, and hopefully we'll see all of you at our next seminar, or at maybe an in-person event soon, if not this year, next year. Thank you all, and have a really great day.